Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Harry, and today we're diving into a case that captivated the world. The tragic story of Caroline Crouch. At just 15, she thought she had found her fairy tale romance, but what followed was a nightmare that would end in unimaginable tragedy. How did a love story spiral into such darkness? Stick around as we unravel this shocking tale, filled with twists and turns that will leave you questioning everything. If you're intrigued, make sure to like, comment, and share this video. Your support means the world and helps us bring more stories like this to light. Many teenage girls dream of finding the one, the love of their life. They imagine eloping, sharing secret vows, and embarking on a lifelong adventure together. Caroline Crouch was no different. At just 15 years old, this bright high schooler found herself captivated by a dashing 27-year-old pilot who would fly his helicopter right over her school, capturing her imagination and heart. He won her over, and soon after, they eloped and tied the knot. But what began as a storybook romance would soon unravel into a global tragedy. On Tuesday, May 11, 2021, at around 4:30 a.m., Paralambasa Annapolis, known as Bobby's, was shaken high awake in a terrifying moment. At the time of the incident, he had rented a two-story maisonette in Glyka, a suburb on the outskirts of Athens, Greece. Bobby's had little time to react as three men with their faces hidden by hoods stormed in and overpowered him. Armed with pistols, they tied him up and blindfolded him with duct tape. Bobby's couldn't do much as the intruders turned their attention to his wife, 19-year-old Caroline. Their 11-month-old daughter, who'd been sleeping nearby, was woken by the commotion. The man, speaking in Greek and Albanian accents, kept demanding to know where the money was. Caroline had no idea that what looked like a robbery would soon end in her murder. Caroline Crouch was born on July 12, 2001, in Athens, to retired engineer David Crouch and Susan Della Costa. When she was 8, her family relocated to the island of Alanissos, where she was raised. David and Susan had fallen in love with the coastal lifestyle. Caroline quickly adapted to her beachside surroundings and developed a love for swimming and scuba diving. She met Babis during a Good Friday parade in 2017. At the time, Babis was a commercial helicopter pilot, and Caroline was only 15. 3 years later, on July 15, 2019, they married in Portugal. A few days before her murder, Babis and Caroline had purchased a plot of land. They planned to build their dream home there, a place for them and their infant daughter. Caroline had received 50,000 euros as a gift from her parents to buy the land. The couple also had about 10,000 euros in cash, hidden in their home for construction costs. At the time, many people in Greece didn't trust banks due to the ongoing financial crisis, which made storing cash at home a common practice. Caroline likely believed it was safer this way and had no reason to fear what would happen next. On May 11th, the situation turned dire. Babis, Caroline, and their daughter were filled with dread as the intruders demanded to know where they kept their savings. In a desperate attempt to save their lives, Babis revealed where the money was hidden, in an unusual spot. The men opened the Monopoly board game and took all the money the couple had stashed away for their future home, but they weren't finished. The intruders continued to roam the house, grabbing jewelry and other valuables, while Babis and Caroline, terrified, pleaded for their lives and that of their daughter. Babis could hear his wife's terrified screams as the men pointed a gun at their infant. Though blindfolded, Babis fought against his restraints, but the ropes around his neck were so tight that he repeatedly lost consciousness. When he finally regained his senses, the men were gone. The only sound left in the house was the desperate crying of his daughter. It took Babis roughly 30 minutes to reach his phone, and using his nose, he managed to dial emergency services. Once connected, he frantically called for help, begging them to send an ambulance and providing his location. Because his mouth was covered with duct tape, Babis's entire call to emergency services was filled with muffled words. The operator on the other end asked him to explain what had happened, but all he could manage to say was, "Robbers came in." By this time, an hour and a half had passed since the intruders had broken into Babis and Caroline's home. First responders arrived at the scene around 6 a.m., quickly rushing up the front steps to get inside. What they encountered was nothing short of horrific. The living room and kitchen had been completely ransacked. Drawers were left wide open, with clothes and other belongings scattered throughout the space. Among the chaos was an open Monopoly box, the very one in which Babis and Caroline had hidden their money. The responders also found a security camera lying on the couch, apparently ripped off the wall. However, its memory card was missing. Tragically, hanging from the staircase was the body of the couple's white and brown husky puppy, who had been strangled with her own leash. Babis was found on the floor of the main bedroom, his eyes and mouth still covered in duct tape, with his hands and feet tied behind him. On the bed, lying face down, was Caroline Crouch. Their infant daughter sat beside her mother, crying and clapping her hands, trying to wake her up. Caroline was already declared dead by the time first responders arrived. The baby, although visibly distressed, appeared unharmed. However, it didn't take long for first responders to notice Caroline's pale complexion, confirming that she had been murdered. Babis went into visible shock when he was freed from his restraints and saw the lifeless body of his wife, the woman he had loved for the last 5 years. Authorities immediately secured the safety of the infant and began questioning Babis. Based on his account and the state of the crime scene, the presence of 4 men was determined. Police concluded that 3 men had entered the home while a 4th stood guard outside. Investigators pieced together the sequence of events leading up to the murder and escape as follows. 1. The intruders approached the house using a dirt road that led to the back entrance. 2. After failing to break in through the back door, they removed the security pins from a basement window and entered the home. 3. Once inside, they killed Roxy, the family's 7-month-old husky. The murder weapon, her own leash. 4. The intruders then made their way into the main bedroom where Babis and Caroline had been sleeping. 5. They ransacked the home, finding the money hidden in the Monopoly box. 6. Before leaving, they murdered Caroline by suffocating her with a pillow. Since Babis was drifting in and out of consciousness, the intruders may have assumed he had died and left the scene, believing they had no witnesses. As for Caroline's death, it was revealed that her ordeal lasted approximately 6 minutes. Bruises found on her body indicated signs of a struggle, while marks on her lips and tongue suggested sharp objects had been used. There were no signs of sexual assault. The investigation continued. Despite the extensive damage done to the home, the intruders left behind very little evidence. The only notable clue was the hood of one of the attackers found at the scene. Based on Babis's recounting of the event, police concluded that the hood likely fell off while Babis struggled to fight back. Although a small detail in such a significant case, this clue provided Babis with a brief glimpse of one of the attackers. He was able to describe an overweight, dark-skinned man of tall stature, leading authorities to create a sketch. Despite being disoriented, Babis also identified 2 firearms used by the intruders, a black pistol and a silver Colt. Details from the investigation revealed that the attackers had escaped with 10,000 euros in cash and jewelry worth 20,000 euros. Investigators believed the crime was carried out by professional criminals who had observed the family for some time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A police spokesperson described the attack as brutal and violent, and categorized it as an act of individuals with no empathy and a deeply antisocial personality. As the investigation progressed, numerous speculations arose, adding new layers of complexity to the case. One question lingered in everyone's mind. If money was the motive, why was the murder necessary? Other theories suggested the intruders may have been high on drugs, unable to control their actions, or perhaps Caroline had recognized one of them. Caroline, a skilled black belt in kickboxing, may have resisted and fought back, forcing the intruders to silence her. There were also suggestions that Caroline may have screamed when she saw her 11-month-old daughter held at gunpoint. While much of this remained speculative, investigators were certain about one thing. The attack was premeditated. They reasoned that the intruders must have known about the money hidden in the home. This led police to question members of Babis and Caroline's inner circle, suspecting that the gang had received a tip. In addition to these interrogations, security footage from nearby homes and businesses was thoroughly reviewed for more clues. In the surveillance footage, authorities spotted a dark-colored car, followed closely by a motorcycle, and cruising near the couple's home on the morning of the murder. Caroline Crouch was laid to rest just 3 days after her tragic death. Her final resting place was the Greek island of Alanissos, where her parents had fallen in love and where she spent her childhood. Davies paid his respects to his late wife, saying he felt fortunate to have met Caroline, even more fortunate that she loved him, and luckiest of all that she was the mother of his daughter. He went on to express his sorrow that their daughter would grow up without ever knowing her mother. He described Caroline as the light of his life, adding that she would always be with him through their daughter. While Caroline's funeral was taking place, police made a routine stop in northeastern Greece, pulling over a car. Inside was a 36-year-old Georgian national, Georgi Hardishvili, heading toward the Bulgarian border. He handed over his passport, but it was quickly flagged as a counterfeit. Who was this man, and what connection did he have to Caroline's death? Investigators soon uncovered that this man was Georgi Hardishvili, a known criminal with a violent past and a string of prior convictions. He was wanted for 12 home burglaries committed across Athens over the last 6 months. What made him a suspect in Caroline's murder was that 3 of these crimes had occurred near her and Babis's neighborhood. One of those burglaries took place in December when Hardishvili and 3 accomplices broke into a home through a back window, much like the attack on Bobby's in Carolina. In that incident, they violently dragged a woman by her hair and threatened to slit her throat. The robbers left with 10,000 euros in cash and jewelry. The next robbery was on March 7, just 2 months before Babis and Caroline became targets. During this attack, they tied up 4 victims, including an elderly couple and their housekeeper, stealing money and valuables worth a substantial amount. If this pattern of crimes wasn't enough to link Hardishvili to the murder, consider this. He bore a striking resemblance to the sketch based on Babis' description of one of the intruders. The mounting evidence against Hardishvili included his history of violent break-ins, his attempt to flee the country, and his resemblance to the suspect in the sketch. With all this evidence in hand, the police felt certain they had their culprit. Hardishvili was apprehended and subjected to 4 days of intense interrogation, during which more aggressive methods were used to extract answers. He was repeatedly questioned about how he got to the scene, entered the house, and murdered Caroline. These methods left him with a concussion. Despite this, Hardishvili stood firm, claiming he had never heard of Caroline Crouch. In the end, the police's evidence against him crumbled, proving he wasn't the man they were after. Hardishvili was cleared of any involvement in the murder. As a result, 3 officers from the Athens homicide unit were demoted. Shifting focus, the police turned their attention to a local Albanian crime syndicate. Their initial list of suspects was around 100 names, but they soon narrowed it down to 10 individuals, all of whom were part of a criminal network known as the Red List. Babis was shown mugshots of these men, but authorities withheld further information. The investigation dragged on and public frustration began to grow, especially as racially motivated crimes continued to rise. Information about Caroline's case was so limited that even a substantial monetary reward went unclaimed. The citizens of Athens were gripped with fear, unsure who might be next. Experts cited in the media said this was no ordinary case. If it had been, it would have been solved by now. Some details that surfaced from the investigation revealed no DNA or fingerprints left behind. Caroline's family, though devastated, expressed their gratitude for the continued efforts to find justice. Davies told reporters that he wished no one else would ever have to endure what he was going through. He publicly supported the police investigation and made frequent media appearances to keep Caroline's case in the public eye. He was even active on social media, responding to messages and thanking people for their support. Then, 37 days after Caroline was brutally murdered, a breakthrough finally came. A small memorial service was being held for Caroline on Alanissos, and among the mourners, a detective was spotted. After the service ended, investigators discreetly approached Babis and requested that he accompany them to Athens. The detectives had new information and asked Babis to help identify a suspect. Without knowing what was coming, Babis agreed. By this time, investigators had followed numerous leads and uncovered key details from the night of Caroline's death. These details didn't add up. Babis had told police that the intruders broke in through a basement window, but the window was too small for the attacker's build, as Babis had described. He also claimed the house had been ransacked, yet neighbors reported hearing no such disturbance. The only sounds that night were of the couple's puppy in distress. There were no sounds of a house being torn apart, no cries for help, no infant wailing. Moreover, Babis claimed the memory card from the living room security camera had been removed by the intruders, but data showed the card had actually been taken out at 1:20 a.m., hours before the supposed break-in. Caroline's smartwatch, which tracked her heart rate, showed her pulse at 3:58 a.m., was normal, indicating she was sleeping, but by 4:05 a.m., it had spiked by 50%, showing she was in severe distress. By 4:11 a.m., her pulse had stopped completely, long before Babis claimed the murder took place. Babis, on the other hand, had a fitness app on his phone that revealed he had been moving around during the time he said he was bound and unable to act. Police even tried to reenact how Babis supposedly dialed emergency services with his nose, but no one could replicate it. Investigators also discovered that on the night of her death, Caroline had attempted to book a hotel for herself and her baby. A text message to a friend showed she was threatening to leave Babis. Back when Babis first met Caroline, he'd been vacationing on Alanissos. His mother, a teacher at Caroline's school, also lived on the island. Babis was charismatic, sharp, and financially comfortable. He caught Caroline's attention by flying a helicopter over her school, something that might seem like a fantasy for many teenage girls. But for Caroline, this dream would soon become a nightmare. She thought she had found the perfect match and even told her family how happy she was. Babis proposed after a year and a half of dating, and although Caroline was still underage, she turned 18 3 days later. The couple married and settled in Glycanera, with Caroline attending college in Athens while Babis continued his work as a pilot. On social media, the couple projected an image of a joyful, loving relationship. But Caroline's private diary told a much darker story. In her entries, she often questioned her relationship with Babis. In 2019, she wrote about a severe argument, stating she had considered leaving him and going to stay with her sister. She wasn't sure if she could continue with him. Over time, Babis became increasingly manipulative and controlling. This behavior could be traced back to their unconventional wedding. When Babis and Caroline wed, they skipped the traditional Greek ceremony full of family and friends, opting instead for a secret elopement. What might have seemed like a romantic gesture was, in reality, the first step in isolating her. The isolation continued once they returned home, where Babis was the sole provider, while Caroline, a student, had little money of her own. Caroline's mother, Susan, sent some money, but even that was taken by Babis. In her diary, Caroline wrote that she loved Babis too much to leave him, even though the relationship was hurting her. One entry detailed a tearful confrontation where she expressed her desire to leave, but since she was pregnant, she felt she couldn't. Caroline wrote, "I stayed for the sake of my daughter so she wouldn't grow up without two parents." Another entry dated July 2020 read, "Today my little girl is 1 month old. I told Babis I want to leave. I feel awful." The diary also mentioned a house in Halandri, Athens. What started as a fairy tale romance for Caroline had turned into a dark abyss of pain, despair, and isolation, one she could never escape. Phone records from the hours leading up to her murder revealed heated, argumentative texts between her and Babis, painting a picture of how distant and toxic their relationship had become. Investigators finally informed Babis that he was now the prime suspect in his wife's murder. Overwhelming evidence laid bare the inconsistencies in his story. After 8 hours of interrogation, Babis broke down and confessed. Though his confession was still riddled with lies, he claimed that on the night of May 10th, he and Caroline had argued about their daughter, with Caroline threatening to take her and leave. Babis said he lost control because his daughter was his whole world. He claimed that during the argument, Caroline threw their baby into the crib and ordered him to leave the house. He alleged that she became violent, pushing and hitting him, and that in a moment of rage, his judgment clouded. From there, Babis lashed out, strangling Caroline and smothering her with a pillow until she died. A cold-blooded murder in front of their 11-month-old child. Babis admitted that he considered disposing of the body, but quickly realized that wasn't possible. It was then that the idea of staging a break-in came to him. To make it believable, he killed the family dog, placed his baby next to Caroline's lifeless body, and tied himself up with duct tape. Babis said he deserved to be punished, apologizing to those he had hurt. While he admitted his actions were inexcusable, he tried to shift the blame onto Caroline, claiming her actions had made him unstable. All that remained was their daughter, who would now grow up without ever knowing her mother, a little girl who would never remember the woman she lost, brutally taken from her by the man she once loved. This case, later dubbed the murder that fooled the world, exposed Babis' confidence in getting away with his crime. So confident, in fact, that he didn't bother destroying key evidence. By May 2022, Babis was convicted of premeditated murder, obstruction of justice, perjury, and animal cruelty. As we dig deeper into the shadows of this case, remember to revisit the channel. There are many more shocking cases lurking here, waiting to be uncovered. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode.